Firstly, I'm Duncan from DataKind. I have a day job, I'm a volunteer. But not all data is big, not all learning is deep, and not all problems belong to the private sector. DataKind exists to help the third sector, charities, because charities can't afford people like you, or can't often afford it, and we need to give them the ability to actually use data for public good. We're an organization that spans the world. We have a chapter here in the UK, we have a chapter in New York, one in DC, one in San Francisco, we have a chapter in Ireland, we have a chapter in Bangalore, and another one in Singapore, and hopefully we will continue to grow. We do events. Sometimes we just have meetups, we get people together to talk about what we can do. But our core work happens either in data dives, which we kind of hackathon. We get volunteers to come in over 2 days, explore the stuff that the problems that charities have, or longer term projects, because frankly, if you can solve a problem in 2 days, it's probably not a really big problem to start with. Okay. This is a story about the collision of open data, government initiatives, privacy, and a charity that wants to expose things for the benefit of the world. You can't see too much of this particular image. It is absolutely wonderful. Apparently this is a sport. It makes at least as much sense as football. We work with charities, not for charities, and that's really important. There's a great XKCD cartoon that came out recently. Who reads XKCD? Who doesn't? Go and read xkcd.com. It was a great one. You know, a data scientist comes in, give me your data, I'll solve all your problems. 6 months later, wow, it turns out this was a difficult problem. So we work with charities, not for them. Okay, this particular problem is looking at the challenge of companies and who owns companies. Because if you have anonymous companies, given the role of companies in society, anonymous companies are problems because you don't know who owns them, who actually gets the benefit from them. And particularly, there are challenges because companies don't stand alone. There are big, complex, difficult networks of companies and company ownership. And that makes it difficult to track things and understand who owns what and why it's there. And sometimes 20 seconds seems like a long time, sometimes it doesn't. This data comes from the UK government. The UK government, through Companies House, has collected data on beneficial ownership of companies. So who are the people who actually gain the benefit from companies? This is really important. And it's the first time a government in the world has put this data out there. And that was a challenge. They felt, or there were some people in government who said, we shouldn't do this. It's private. And the data itself had some interesting problems. So we broke into three teams. The first team looked at the data and tried to understand the problems with it. The first problem, your nationality was a free text entry field. I'll leave it at that. The good news is that once we'd disaggregated the Cornish, the British, we found that most of the people in the data set were UK residents, not necessarily UK citizens. There was 7% ownership overseas. So that's an interesting thing to find out. It's the first time this data's been analysed. Matching people up is complex because we only have information on their name and their date of birth, so it's not always ideal. But some of the things we found out is that actually 3,000 companies had a tax haven listed beneficial owner. And that's starting to get worrying because it's not necessarily illegal, but it's certainly on the areas of dodgy. I've been told by my lawyer friends, of whom I have none, that dodgy and illegal aren't the same thing. You also find some interesting things. Royalty, anyone here a member of the royal family? Or indeed of other royal families. I believe Spain has a royal family. There are other royal families are available. Royalty owns 785 companies, and there's this wonderful thing, Who Owns England, who have put this initial map of land ownership. Land ownership is frequently owned by companies. Companies are linked together. We had a second team who were looking at networks, frequently on laptops. Using Neo4j, for those of you, is that too close to an equation? No, okay. Using Neo4j to start looking at it. I love networks. Networks can tell you a lot of stuff, and I can tell you some really dodgy stuff from telcos about networks later. The idea was that there would be a simple diagram. We would have people, and we would say we've got two people, we think they're the same person. that's challenging because, as I say, we have names and we have dates of birth, but not much else to go on. So if your name is John Smith or Mohammed Iqbal, actually it's quite difficult to see if you're unique. If your name's Duncan Ross, it's a bit easier. Companies, people can control companies. Companies control other companies. And that results in very complex structures. This is a single company. It's actually a pharmaceutical company. And you can look at that and you can see of the chaos of company owns other company, there are networks. Some of these companies don't actually do anything, they're just historical oddities because they bought something a while ago and they have the name. Automotive companies are terrible at that, hence all the branding for that. But we also have complex structures when we look at how people link through companies to other people. And sometimes we see interesting things. Going back to the data, there was one person, one woman, who the day she turned 18 suddenly decided she wanted to start 200 companies. Now, what we suspect that is a company house. People want to buy companies off the shelf, and so people have to create them. And we see interesting things here. Here we have a company that controls itself. Okay? So a kind of nice logical loop to be in. But you do start seeing this. Now, why is that important? Well, it may not be important at all, but actually the fact that Companies House is allowing this to go through suggests there are some interesting challenges. The third group looked at using other data to try and explore, are there any nefarious I like the word nefarious, it's good, isn't it? Nefarious practices going in. So we used some data from Spend Network, we used some data from the US government that was perhaps, how shall I say this, came through an interesting route. And we wanted to understand things like companies who do business with the government, so they're using our money, not just the money we give through advertising or through buying things, but actually our tax money. Who owns those? Should we be worried about that? And you can look at actually the Financial Secrecy Index and various other things to try and understand that. What we can't say, of course, is any of this illegal? We had some indicators that some of these people were on, for example, politically exposed person lists from the US. So you had people who were, the politically exposed person lists might include people like, let's say, Donald Trump, if he's still in office at the moment. And that could be problematic. Anyway, very briefly, we're DataKind. We have events going ahead. If you want to get involved, you can use either of the top two addresses, or you can contact us on Twitter. We're at DataKindUK. I'm at Duncan3Ross for various odd reasons. Thank you for listening. Hope that was interesting. Yeah.
Thank you, Duncan, for this very inspiring talk. That data can be used for good or understanding good things. So we have time for a few questions.
So, have you approached the FSA with information?
No, we've been working with Companies House, and we hope to do a deeper project because we were just kind of.
The FSA you want to speak to?
Well, it may be, but that's the role of open corporates. So open corporates may choose to use this to actually try and expose things, but this is early stages. The good news is that based on the work we've done, we think there will be a longer-term project. We've also seen interest from the governments of Belgium, not necessarily associated with financial misdoings, and Nigeria, who are interested in trying to take the... I didn't say anything about Nigeria, who are interested in actually the same kind of approach. Could they, if they expose this data, would it be a way of cleaning up some of the dodgy practices? Because this data should have been available, and companies' data is available, but there's no real evidence that people are policing it particularly closely or have an interest in doing that.
I'll catch you after.
Yeah, absolutely. Sorry, he's directly pointing.
When is your next hackathon, and how do you get people to apply for it?
So if you go onto the website, you can sign up to our mailing list, and hopefully that works now, and you will get invited to these things. They do tend to... Sorry?
Do you need some web developers for that?
No. I'm reasonably confident that Salesforce is working. Reasonably, but not hugely. Anyway, but basically, we want people with a wide variety of skills. Yes, we want people who can do the deep learning. Okay? We want people who frankly, maybe haven't got that experience, but actually bring different insights. One of my favorite anecdotes is someone who came along to an event who was, she came up in the break and said, I'm not certain that I fit in. So why, what do you do? I'm an actor, okay? And she discovered, mysteriously, it turns out there's not a lot of money in acting for most people. So she wanted to retrain in data science, where there's more money for people. And she was brilliant because she sat down beside someone who was a PhD, who was trying to get straight into the really not quite deep learning, but significant machine learning. And she kept asking him, what are you doing? Why are you doing it? How does that relate to the actual question you're trying to answer? And she acted as a superb bridge between the technical and the charity, and that was really helpful. Sorry, a bit of a ramble there.
So for those who've worked in government, we were really chuffed to get out things like beneficial ownership and spending data. In order to get this sort of stuff to happen, what's next? What should we be looking at?
Government, I don't think this is necessarily the right day to be telling government what to do, other than in the voting sense. Well, I mean, I hold my hand up, I was a member of the Open Data User Group as part of Cabinet Office a while ago. The challenge for government is actually living up to the promise of open data, which means understanding that PDF is not a data format. And also consistency in what's published. I mean, a lot of the time what happens is you have lots of good intentions, but you publish data in one format one year, and then 18 months later you remember that you should have done it again, so you do it, sort of backdate it, but you do it in a different format, and it can't really be linked up. So I would say it's about continuing to push those boundaries. And then internally, there's some brilliant work. We just did a data dive, which we're talking about on Monday at a meetup with the Office of National Statistics out in Newport, because we're a UK charity, so we believe there are places outside London. I'm not entirely certain, but I believe that. And that was really great work working with the ONS people. So there are two aspects to it. Actually, more people in government need to get involved in stuff outside government to bring their expertise and also to grow their expertise. So, rambling.
I think we're quite beneficial in the UK because we have got quite a strong open data kind of movement. And you said that there are chapters for data kind across the world. So what type of questions are they solving in developing countries?
So very different questions. So we're driven by the third sector in our various countries. So although we will do work with DFID, for example, our primary focus is on UK-based charities, and we've done work with Oxfam as well. But for example, in Bangalore, they just had an event this weekend. I'm not quite certain where they were working on, but I tweeted back, they got a model that was 94% accurate, which, as you can guess, was entirely wrong, and they spotted that. And there was an implication that was something to do with blue tarpaulins, and I have no idea what that is, and I'm going to chase that up. But for example, sometimes they use satellite imagery. Satellite imagery can be really powerful in parts of the world where you don't have good open data sets, because it gives you insight into things like agricultural usage. It can give you insights into poverty. Just looking at things like a nighttime picture of a city tells you where you have electricity. Okay, and that's really interesting. There are some data sets there. There's data sets from NGOs, for example. There are some government data sets, but you're right, the UK is in a privileged position because we have a strong open data movement and actually quite a lot of data available in the NGO sector. A challenge for our NGOs is actually data sharing. If I have two homelessness charities, can they work out ways of sharing that data and that insight without breaching, well, formerly DPA 1998, but future GDPR, I lose track of my initials. Sorry? GDPR, I did get that the right way around. I suddenly had this mental image that was the other way around. But doing that without breaching those issues. Because if they can do that, then they can do a lot more. I'm hoping at some point we will do an around the world data dive, where we'll start in Singapore and we'll work through Singapore, Bangalore, the UK, Dublin, DC and New York, San Francisco, and then back around again. We will follow the sun around, and that will be one of my ambitions.
I got an email from the Prince of Nigeria saying
He's a trustable guy. He's great. He's both royal family and from Nigeria. I would have no qualms whatsoever. Now, I mean, joking aside, I mean, Nigeria is a very interesting country because although we associate it with that, the wealth of Nigeria is growing rapidly, and this is causing huge challenges. So I was privileged to attend a talk by Wole Soyinka, Nobel laureate, who was talking about the challenges of higher education in Nigeria, where they're facing real difficulties dealing with Boko Haram and infiltration into universities by Islamists. And how do you deal with that? How do you have an education which works for the whole country and can't be taken over by Islamist groups? But there you go.
Did you give a try with Italy?
Hmm?
Did you give a try with Italy?
I haven't done anything with Italy yet, but I'm working.
Well, I think we can thank Duncan again.
Thank you all.